Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with an undeniable truth. The choices we make in our relationships are not simply about who we spend time with, who we love, or who we desire. They are decisions that shape the very fabric of our identity, that influence the course of our lives in ways we often fail to comprehend. When a man finds himself caught between two women, what he's actually dealing with is not just two women. He's dealing with two versions of himself, and each woman represents a different part of his psyche. But here's the thing, when you're caught in that kind of turmoil, it isn't just a romantic entanglement, it's a psychological and moral crisis. Dishonesty, whether it manifests as lies toward others or perhaps more insidiously, as lies to oneself, creates a profound and enduring disruption in the individual's psychological state. When a man becomes involved with two women simultaneously, he is not merely engaging in deceit, he is constructing a false reality, one that divides his attention, his emotions, and his sense of self. The initial falsehoods might appear small or even harmless, the necessary tools to navigate two separate relationships, but the true psychological consequences of dishonesty are far-reaching and much more damaging than they may initially seem. From a psychological perspective, dishonesty causes a fundamental break in a person's perception of reality. Every time a man lies, especially when he tries to keep two relationships alive through deceit, he is forcing himself to maintain two separate versions of the truth. The internal contradiction between these versions leads to what is called cognitive dissonance, a psychological phenomenon where a person experiences mental discomfort from holding two conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes. The man in question is fully aware on some level that his actions contradict his true values or beliefs, but he is unable or unwilling to reconcile these contradictions. This discomfort is not only an intellectual awareness, but also an emotional experience. Cognitive dissonance can feel like an internal war, a constant low-grade anxiety that doesn't subside. It's like trying to live in two worlds at once, and the emotional toll this takes is immense. A person might feel emotionally drained, restless, or even on edge because the mind is constantly juggling multiple conflicting realities. This psychological tension becomes harder to sustain as time goes on, leading to an erosion of emotional resources and ultimately to the development of more serious emotional issues like anxiety or depression. The emotional weight of dishonesty compounds itself over time. As these internal contradictions deepen, the individual begins to feel increasingly disconnected from himself. The psychological term for this is self-alienation. The man begins to feel like a stranger to himself, as if he is not truly living in alignment with who he is at his core. The lies force him into a position where he is perpetually pretending, wearing masks, and this facade becomes more exhausting by the day. Psychologically, this self-alienation leads to feelings of confusion and instability. He begins to lose track of his values, his goals, and even his sense of direction in life. The words he speaks to others no longer reflect his own beliefs. He may tell one woman that he loves her while telling the other something equally heartfelt, but internally he is torn. He is no longer fully aware of the person he is trying to be. In essence, the man becomes a ghost of his true self. This process of self-deception also fuels a deep sense of guilt. At the start, guilt may be a faint whisper in the back of the mind, a slight discomfort when one of the women asks a question that feels too intimate, too revealing. Over time, however, as the lies compound, this guilt becomes more pronounced, harder to ignore. In psychological terms, this is known as moral injury, a concept often associated with experiences that challenge one's fundamental sense of right and wrong. The man is living in a state of moral injury, constantly violating his own ethical standards, which leads to a deeper emotional toll. Guilt is a psychological burden that the body and mind cannot bear indefinitely. It eats away at a person's peace of mind. The man may try to escape these feelings through distractions, work, alcohol, or other forms of avoidance, but the guilt remains. The more he lies, the heavier the weight becomes. Eventually, this accumulated guilt transforms into shame, which is a far more damaging emotion. Shame is not just about feeling bad about one's actions, it is a profound sense of feeling bad about who you are as a person. As Nietzsche wisely stated, he who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, The abyss will gaze back into you. The man who lies repeatedly and manipulates others in pursuit of his desires becomes distorted by his own deceit. He begins to lose touch with the very thing that would save him, his own integrity. When dishonesty becomes a way of life, it doesn't just ruin relationships with others, it destroys the relationship the man has with himself. The more one lies, the more fractured the self becomes. Eventually, the individual may experience a profound sense of self-loss, a disconnection so deep that it feels as though they are no longer capable of being authentic. This dishonesty also erodes trust, the bedrock of any meaningful relationship. Trust is not just something we offer to others, it is the fundamental currency of human connection. The man who lies to maintain two relationships may temporarily succeed in maintaining these separate worlds, but trust, once broken, is difficult, if not impossible, to rebuild. Each lie, each hidden conversation erodes the very trust that the relationships are built on. The women involved may not realize the truth immediately, but the lack of authenticity in the man's behavior will eventually manifest itself in the relationship's dynamics. His fear of being discovered will cause him to be emotionally unavailable or to act in ways that are inconsistent with his true self. The deeper the dishonesty, the greater the distrust, and the greater the damage to these relationships. There are, of course, psychological examples that show how dishonesty can create a spiraling effect in an individual's life. Take, for instance, a man who begins with small lies, perhaps telling one woman that he's busy when he is not, or making excuses for why he cannot be fully present. These lies are easy to manage at first, but as the lies accumulate, they begin to feel less like choices and more like a part of who he is. Over time, this dishonesty grows into an all-consuming behavior. This man may become distant, withdrawing emotionally from both women, yet unable to make a decision to end either relationship. He finds himself trapped in his own web of lies, unable to find the clarity or courage to confront the truth. The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. This quote from James A. Garfield speaks to the emotional cost of honesty. While the truth might bring liberation in the long run, it comes at a heavy price. The man caught in dishonesty will, inevitably, reach a point where the cost of continuing the lie becomes unbearable. At this stage, he will have to make a decision: continue living in deception or face the consequences of truth-telling. The psychological toll of carrying on the charade for too long often results in emotional breakdowns, loss of self-esteem, and a profound sense of isolation. Ultimately, the man becomes a prisoner of his own choices, unable to escape the psychological consequences of dishonesty. This continuous internal conflict and emotional turmoil can lead to a breakdown in emotional health. The dissonance that arises from managing multiple truths causes the individual to become emotionally detached, less in tune with their genuine feelings, and unable to make decisions based on clarity. They may fall into depression, not because of the relationships themselves, but because they are burdened by the weight of maintaining the lies. Their emotional health becomes compromised as they fail to address the underlying problem, the lack of honesty. Dishonesty is not simply a violation of moral codes, it is an existential crisis that erodes a person's mental and emotional foundation. The more one lies, the more one distances themselves from their authentic self. The toll is not just on the relationships with others, but on the very psyche of the individual. The emotional cost of dishonesty is staggering, leading to guilt, shame, disconnection, and ultimately a loss of integrity. And once integrity is lost, so too is the possibility of living a meaningful, purposeful life. Responsibility is often seen as a burden, something that requires effort and accountability, but in the context of relationships, it is an essential cornerstone that provides meaning, stability, and purpose. When a man is involved with two women, he is essentially avoiding the very responsibility that relationships demand. This avoidance stems from a reluctance to confront the deeper questions about who he wants to be, what kind of person he aspires to become, and how he is willing to engage with the complexities of life and love. Relationships, in their truest form, require more than just the pursuit of affection or desire. They require a commitment to something beyond oneself, a responsibility to the other person, to the shared bond, and to the greater good that the relationship can bring into both parties' lives. The act of taking responsibility within a relationship is not merely about managing logistics or meeting the immediate needs of a partner. It is a psychological and moral commitment to honesty, integrity, and growth. The man who is unable to fully commit to one relationship out of fear or selfishness is failing to engage with the deeper aspects of responsibility that define mature love. The psychological implications of avoiding responsibility are profound. When a man avoids responsibility, he begins to evade the very foundation that gives his life meaning and structure. Avoidance of responsibility leads to an inner fragmentation, as he is not fully integrating the aspects of his life that require attention and care. Each relationship he juggles becomes a way to bypass the difficult but necessary work of confronting his desires, fears, and emotional needs. This lack of responsibility also reflects a failure to confront the complexities and challenges that come with commitment. Commitment, in the context of a relationship, is not about mindlessly adhering to the status quo. It is about confronting the inevitable difficulties, misunderstandings, and emotional challenges that arise when two people attempt to build something meaningful together. It is a willingness to take ownership of one's actions and to be accountable for the choices made within the relationship. The absence of responsibility, therefore, leads to a deep sense of existential emptiness. Without this commitment to responsibility, relationships become transactional or superficial. The person caught in this pattern cannot move forward or grow with their partner because they are not willing to face the responsibility of true intimacy. Without responsibility, there can be no meaningful engagement with the other person. Instead, there is only a hollow imitation of connection. Taking responsibility also means taking ownership of one's desires and emotions. A man who chooses to be involved with two women at once is likely avoiding the hard work of confronting the deeper reasons behind his actions. It is often easier to keep multiple options open, to avoid making a definitive choice, and to keep one's emotional energy divided between several different people. But this is not the path of responsibility. It is the path of avoidance. The act of avoiding responsibility can stem from a fear of confronting one's own vulnerabilities, insecurities, or limitations. The man who avoids responsibility in relationships may be doing so because he is unwilling to fully commit to one person, as he is afraid of the emotional work required. Instead, he remains in a state of constant flux, never fully investing in the depth of a relationship. This avoidance also reveals a failure to engage in personal growth. Responsibility in relationships is not just about giving to others, it is about receiving the opportunity to grow and develop as an individual. Every relationship presents a chance to face difficult emotions, to learn from mistakes, and to work through conflicts. Responsibility is therefore not a burden, it is a pathway to transformation. The man who avoids the responsibility of commitment misses out on the opportunity to evolve as a person. He remains stagnant, unable to experience the full potential of what love, connection, and growth can offer. Responsibility in relationships creates the environment necessary for personal and relational development. Without this engagement, the individual is left adrift, disconnected from both himself and the people he interacts with. The avoidance of responsibility is, at its core, an avoidance of the larger question, what kind of person do you want to be? The man who shirks responsibility by keeping multiple relationships alive is avoiding an encounter with this question. It is a refusal to face the discomfort of making difficult decisions, of committing to a path, and of accepting the consequences of one's choices. Responsibility forces us to confront our fears, our desires, and our limitations. It compels us to engage with the world in a way that is grounded in integrity and purpose. Avoiding it, on the other hand, leads to a life that lacks direction and depth. The man who avoids responsibility in his relationships is avoiding responsibility in his life. He is evading the deeper question of what it means to be a whole, integrated person who can make meaningful contributions to the world around him. The reluctance to take responsibility also prevents the man from understanding the true meaning of love and connection. Love, in its most mature form, is built on a foundation of responsibility. It is about being present for the other person, holding space for their emotional needs, and being willing to sacrifice personal desires for the greater good of the relationship. When a man is involved with two women, he is not only avoiding responsibility toward the women in his life, but also avoiding the deeper responsibility to himself. He fails to face the discomfort that comes with choosing one path and committing to it. Without this willingness to engage fully, relationships cannot move beyond the superficial or the transactional. They cannot evolve into sources of real growth, understanding, and transformation. The choice to avoid responsibility in relationships ultimately leads to a failure to build a solid, cohesive identity. Responsibility is the force that binds a person to their true self. It forces the individual to reckon with their own desires, emotions, and actions in a way that leads to integration and authenticity. The man who avoids this responsibility, on the other hand, fragments himself. He lives a life that is disconnected from his own core values, unable to develop the strength of character that comes from making difficult decisions and facing the consequences. Without responsibility, the individual is left with a hollow sense of self, a lack of clarity about who they are and what they stand for. Responsibility in relationships is not merely about fulfilling obligations or adhering to external expectations. It is about choosing to engage deeply with the complexities of love, intimacy, and personal growth. It is the act of taking ownership of one's choices and accepting the weight that comes with those choices. The man who shirks this responsibility ultimately finds himself lost, unable to understand himself, unable to build meaningful connections, and unable to create a life that is full of purpose and direction. The true challenge of responsibility is not the weight of duty, it is the courage to face the unknown, to make difficult decisions, and to commit to a path that leads to greater meaning and fulfillment. Power and manipulation are intricately woven into the fabric of human relationships. They are not just external forces, they are deeply embedded within the psyche of individuals, shaping the way they interact with others and perceive themselves. When a person, particularly a man in a relationship with two women, becomes engaged in manipulation, it is often driven by an unconscious desire to control outcomes, protect the ego, or maintain a sense of superiority. The dynamics of power and manipulation in relationships can be subtle, insidious, and often invisible to both the manipulator and the manipulated. At their core, these dynamics are about control over emotions, behaviors, and perceptions, both of oneself and of others. Power in relationships doesn't always manifest through overt actions like force or coercion. It can often be far more subtle, operating in the background of interactions. In this case, the man who seeks to juggle two relationships may not see himself as manipulating the women involved. However, the act of keeping both women in the dark about each other, managing their emotions, and dictating the terms of interaction is, in essence, a form of manipulation. He might manipulate by creating situations where one woman feels particularly needed or desired, only to pull back emotionally when the other is present, thereby controlling their emotional states and ensuring that they continue to invest in him. Psychologically speaking, manipulation is an unconscious attempt to meet one's own needs without regard for the well-being of others. The man in question might manipulate the women by playing on their vulnerabilities, using emotional tactics to keep them engaged while avoiding the responsibilities of full emotional honesty and commitment. For example, he might withhold affection or attention to induce insecurity, knowing that this will make one woman more desperate for his approval and affection. This creates a psychological loop where the manipulated woman becomes emotionally dependent on him for validation, and the man maintains a sense of power and control over her emotional state. The dynamics of manipulation also extend into the realm of guilt. The manipulator often uses guilt to keep others under their control. This is particularly effective in romantic relationships where emotional vulnerability is high. The man might play the victim, presenting himself as misunderstood or wronged, which compels the women to feel sympathy for him and, in turn, become more emotionally invested. He might say things like, "You're the only one who truly understands me," or "I'm afraid of hurting you, but I just don't know what to do." These words, while they may seem innocent or even empathetic, are often calculated to evoke a sense of responsibility or guilt in the other person. The manipulator uses this guilt as a tool to maintain control over the situation, subtly coercing the women to stay invested in the relationship while he maintains emotional distance. Manipulation often relies on a deep understanding of the emotional triggers of others. In a relationship, this might look like the man exploiting a woman's insecurities or fears to maintain power. For instance, if one woman is particularly sensitive to rejection or abandonment, he might use these fears to his advantage, knowing that any emotional withdrawal will make her cling harder. On the other hand, if the other woman fears being controlled, he may make her feel uniquely special and free. playing on the notion that she is not like the others and thus deserving of more attention. This careful manipulation of emotions is what keeps both women tied to him, unaware of each other's existence and unaware of the psychological game being played. The underlying reason for these manipulative tactics is often a lack of personal responsibility and a deep-seated fear of intimacy and vulnerability. The man engaging in such behavior might be incapable of confronting the complexities of true emotional connection. Instead of facing the discomfort that comes with vulnerability and the potential risks of committing to one person, he manipulates the emotions of others to ensure that he is always in control. He doesn't have to confront his own insecurities, his own limitations, or the real work that comes with building an authentic relationship. Instead, he keeps both women emotionally tethered to him in a way that ensures he never has to truly expose himself. Psychologically, this manipulation can stem from a deeper fear of rejection or a need to feel validated. For some individuals, maintaining power in a relationship is a way to avoid feeling inadequate or unworthy. By controlling how others feel and behave, the manipulator is able to create an illusion of self-worth and importance. This illusion is fragile, however, because it is built on the suppression of others' autonomy and emotional expression. It is a shallow form of validation that requires constant maintenance and vigilance. The man must continue to manipulate, to play on the fears and desires of others in order to sustain the sense of power that he has constructed. The dynamics of power and manipulation are not just limited to the individual who wields it, they extend to those being manipulated as well. The women involved, despite their own emotional investments, are often complicit in the manipulation, albeit unknowingly. They may at times feel uneasy or confused by the inconsistencies in the relationship, but the psychological need to seek approval, affection, or validation often outweighs their ability to recognize the manipulation. This emotional fog prevents them from seeing the truth that they are being used as pawns in a game of emotional control. At a deeper level, manipulation also serves as a defense mechanism. It is a way for the manipulator to avoid the vulnerability that comes with true emotional intimacy. Rather than risking the possibility of genuine connection, with all of its inherent uncertainties and potential for pain, the manipulator uses control to create a false sense of safety. The truth is, control in relationships is an illusion. It might seem to give the man power, but it isolates him from real emotional intimacy and connection. He remains perpetually guarded, never allowing himself to experience the fullness of love, because he is always manipulating the dynamics to avoid true vulnerability. The manipulator's behavior often reflects deep psychological wounds, such as fear of abandonment, rejection, or inadequacy. These wounds are masked by the power they seek to exert over others. The need for control becomes a coping strategy, allowing the individual to avoid confronting their own deep-seated fears. Instead of facing their insecurities head-on, they project power onto others, creating a sense of superiority and dominance that shields them from the reality of their emotional fragility. Over time, the consequences of such manipulation become clear. It erodes trust and mutual respect in relationships, leaving the manipulated individuals feeling betrayed, confused, and emotionally exhausted. Manipulation, by its very nature, prevents people from forming true connections based on authenticity and trust. When a person is constantly playing games, hiding their true intentions, and seeking to control the emotional states of others, they cannot experience the kind of intimacy that comes from mutual vulnerability and shared understanding. The dynamics of power and manipulation ultimately lead to a broken sense of self for both the manipulator and the manipulated. The manipulator is left with a hollow sense of power, one that is built on control rather than true emotional connection. The manipulated individuals, on the other hand, are left questioning their worth, their perception of reality, and their emotional stability. Both parties suffer, but the man who manipulates is often the most deeply affected, as he is trapped in a cycle of deceit, never able to experience the depth and richness that genuine, honest relationships offer. The search for meaning is one of the most profound aspects of the human experience. It drives us to understand who we are, why we are here, and what our lives are meant to represent. Meaning doesn't come from a place of passivity. It requires active engagement with life and a willingness to explore the depths of both our own nature and the world around us. The quest for meaning in its purest form is an existential challenge, a challenge to find purpose, significance, and clarity in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain. Yet this search cannot be fully realized without a sense of commitment. Commitment is what transforms abstract desires into concrete realities. It is what turns aspirations into actions, goals into achievements, and dreams into lived experiences. When individuals approach life with a commitment to something greater than themselves, whether that is a personal goal, a cause, or a relationship, they begin to engage with the world in a way that imbues their actions with meaning. Commitment provides direction, structure, and a sense of stability. It forces a person to make decisions, to prioritize, and to give up the comfort of transient options in exchange for a deeper, more lasting fulfillment. In relationships, for instance, commitment is the mechanism through which meaning is forged. The search for love, connection, and understanding cannot thrive without commitment. When a man is divided in his attentions, when he splits his focus between two relationships, he prevents himself from fully committing to one, and in doing so, he obstructs the potential for meaning that could come from deep, genuine connection. Commitment is not simply about choosing one path and sticking with it. It's about the profound understanding that true meaning in life comes through the investment of energy, emotion, and time into something that requires both sacrifice and dedication. It is about acknowledging that everything of value in life demands effort. Whether in relationships, careers, or personal development, commitment calls for a sustained engagement, a willingness to face difficulties head-on, and the fortitude to persevere even when things become challenging. In this sense, commitment isn't a mere action, it's a mindset. A way of approaching life with a sense of purpose and responsibility. In relationships, the absence of commitment reveals the deeper issue of avoiding the full responsibility of love. When a person is not fully committed to another, they are unable to engage in the emotional depth and vulnerability that love requires. Love, in its truest sense, involves not only sharing joy and affection, but also navigating conflict, accepting imperfection, and growing together. Commitment provides the necessary foundation for this kind of love to flourish. It is through commitment that we create the space for the other person to be fully seen, heard, and accepted. It is through commitment that the full potential of the relationship can be realized. Without it, relationships become shallow and fleeting, unable to provide the transformative power that true intimacy offers. Psychologically, the role of commitment in the search for meaning is profound. It brings order to the chaos of choice and gives us the ability to invest ourselves in something that transcends our individual desires and impulses. When we commit to something, we are essentially creating a framework within which we can explore our own values, beliefs, and emotions. Commitment allows us to test our limits, to confront our own weaknesses, and to evolve into more integrated versions of ourselves. For instance, a person committed to a long-term relationship must navigate not only the joys of connection, but also the challenges of maintaining that connection in the face of personal growth, external stress, and changing circumstances. This is where meaning is found not in the ease of a situation, but in the courage to engage with life's complexities and to remain steadfast in the face of difficulty. The search for meaning and the role of commitment are inseparable. One cannot exist without the other. Meaning is the outcome of commitment, and commitment is the pathway that allows us to build and discover meaning in our lives. Commitment demands that we surrender the safety of indecision, that we accept the discomfort of facing our limitations, and that we embrace the uncertainty of the unknown. It requires a surrender of control, an understanding that meaning is not something that can be manipulated or coerced, but something that unfolds through sustained effort and engagement with the world. This search for meaning is the question of what we are willing to dedicate ourselves to. If a man refuses to commit to one relationship, choosing instead to divide his attentions between two, he is signaling a deeper issue within himself, an unwillingness to make a decisive choice about what truly matters. He may be avoiding the discomfort of fully committing, perhaps out of fear of being vulnerable, of failing, or of facing the realities of imperfection and conflict. But in doing so, he denies himself the richness of meaning that can only arise from true commitment. By not choosing, he remains in a state of limbo, caught between possibilities but never fully engaging with any of them. Commitment also plays a vital role in how we define ourselves and our lives. In the absence of commitment, we are left without a clear sense of direction. We may pursue many things, but without the binding force of commitment, our efforts can become fragmented, disjointed, and meaningless. It is through commitment that we begin to shape our identity. As we dedicate ourselves to particular pursuits, relationships, or causes, our commitment to others, to our own growth, and to the values we hold dear gives our lives coherence and purpose. In this sense, commitment is not merely about a single action, it is about the cumulative effect of consistently choosing to invest in something that matters. It is about aligning our daily decisions with our deeper beliefs and values, so that our actions speak to who we are at the core. The search for meaning is a journey that requires patience, resilience, and courage. It is not a straightforward path, and it does not come with guarantees of success or happiness. But it is through commitment that we begin to build the foundations upon which meaning can take root. Without commitment, we are left adrift in a sea of possibilities, never fully realizing the potential of our lives. Commitment, therefore, is the act of choosing to invest in something greater than ourselves, something that forces us to confront our own limitations, to face discomfort, and to grow. It is through this process that meaning is discovered, not in the fleeting pursuit of pleasure or avoidance of discomfort, but in the willingness to commit to something that transcends our individual desires and connects us to a larger purpose. Emotional health and integrity are foundational elements that guide how we navigate the world and relate to others. When these are compromised, the consequences can ripple throughout every aspect of our lives, often in ways that are not immediately obvious but deeply felt. Integrity, in particular, is the alignment between our values, beliefs, and actions, while emotional health refers to our ability to process, understand, and express our feelings in a healthy way. These two forces are intimately linked because the absence of one can erode the other. A person who operates without integrity, for instance, is likely to experience internal conflict, guilt, and a growing sense of disconnection from themselves and others. This conflict can quickly spiral into emotional distress, affecting both mental and physical health. When we engage in behaviors that undermine our integrity, such as deceit or manipulation, we are betraying ourselves. This betrayal leads to a fractured sense of self, where our actions do not align with our core values. Over time, this dissonance becomes harder to ignore. The emotional toll of dishonesty, for instance, is immense. At first, we may justify our actions or dismiss the emotional cost, but as time passes, the accumulated weight of this misalignment begins to show. Feelings of anxiety, shame, and self-doubt often follow, leading to a loss of self-respect and, in many cases, the erosion of trust in relationships. A person who engages in manipulation or deceit may feel temporarily empowered, but this power is hollow. They begin to feel increasingly disconnected from others because their relationships are built on falsehoods, not trust. The emotional toll this takes is far greater than any immediate benefit the individual might experience from their manipulative behavior. Emotional health is also deeply affected by the stress of living inauthentically. Maintaining a facade requires constant vigilance, emotional energy, and mental effort. The individual who feels compelled to maintain multiple relationships without full honesty, for example, is constantly managing emotions, expectations, and perceptions. They must keep track of lies and half-truths, always fearful that the truth will be discovered. This kind of emotional strain can lead to burnout, anxiety, and depression. The emotional weight of dishonesty doesn't simply vanish after a lie is told. It lingers in the form of unresolved feelings, leading to a sense of emptiness or emotional numbness. The more a person avoids confronting their emotional reality, the more disconnected they become from their own emotional needs, which can manifest as chronic stress or a general sense of dissatisfaction with life. The absence of integrity can also erode the quality of relationships, which are essential to emotional well-being. Relationships built on deceit or manipulation often create an unhealthy dynamic where trust is absent and emotional vulnerability is never fully realized. Vulnerability is essential for emotional intimacy. It allows individuals to connect on a deeper level, to share their fears, desires, and imperfections. When there is a lack of integrity in a relationship, both individuals are forced to hide parts of themselves, fearing judgment or rejection. This creates a barrier that prevents true emotional connection from forming. The emotional toll of maintaining these facades leads to a gradual erosion of self-worth and self-esteem. A person who is emotionally unhealthy and lacking in integrity will struggle to trust themselves, let alone others, which creates a cycle of isolation and dissatisfaction. Emotional health thrives in environments where authenticity and transparency are present. When we are honest and true to ourselves, we are more likely to experience a sense of inner peace and clarity. This is because we are not burdened by the need to hide or deceive, and we can embrace our emotions as they come rather than repressing them. When integrity is upheld, individuals are more likely to feel at peace with their decisions, as their actions align with their core values. This alignment fosters emotional resilience, as the individual is no longer at war with themselves. They can face challenges with a sense of self-assurance because they know they are operating from a place of truth. Emotional health, then, is nurtured not just by external support systems, but also by an internal harmony that arises from living authentically and maintaining integrity in one's actions. The psychological effects of living without integrity can also lead to a diminished sense of personal control. When we act in ways that go against our values or manipulate others, we are essentially surrendering our autonomy to external factors. We allow our fears, insecurities, or desires to dictate our actions instead of making deliberate, value-driven choices. This loss of control over our actions creates a psychological imbalance. A person who manipulates others to maintain a sense of power may momentarily feel in control, but deep down they know they are not truly in control of their emotional and mental well-being. They have relinquished control to their fear of vulnerability, judgment, or failure. This lack of agency can cause a profound sense of helplessness and hopelessness, which chips away at emotional health and creates a self-perpetuating cycle of negativity. The long-term effects of compromised emotional health and integrity can extend beyond the individual to affect their interactions with the world around them. When a person's emotional health is poor and their integrity compromised, they are less likely to engage with others in a healthy and constructive way. They may project their unresolved emotions onto others, often lashing out in frustration, anger, or defensiveness. These reactions are not only damaging to their relationships, but also create a toxic environment for personal growth. Emotional health requires the ability to process emotions in a healthy way and to engage with others in a manner that fosters growth and understanding. When integrity is absent, emotional expression becomes distorted, leading to misunderstandings, conflicts, and a deepening sense of isolation. The lack of emotional health and integrity can also manifest in physical health problems. The mind and body are closely linked, and unresolved emotional issues often manifest in physical symptoms. Chronic stress, anxiety, and the emotional weight of dishonesty can lead to a variety of health issues, including headaches, digestive problems, high blood pressure, and sleep disturbances. When a person's emotional health is compromised, the physical body bears the brunt of the psychological strain. Furthermore, the long-term suppression of emotions and the avoidance of confronting personal truths can lead to the development of chronic conditions such as depression or anxiety disorders, both of which can profoundly affect a person's ability to function in everyday life. Living without integrity and emotional health creates an environment of inner turmoil. It generates feelings of confusion, self-doubt, and a lack of clarity, all of which contribute to emotional and mental exhaustion. When a person's emotions are not aligned with their actions, they experience a sense of disconnection from their true selves. This internal conflict not only affects their relationships with others, but also impacts their sense of self-worth. Integrity and emotional health are essential to maintaining a healthy, balanced, and fulfilling life. Without them, individuals are more likely to feel lost, disconnected, and overwhelmed, unable to cultivate meaningful relationships or a strong sense of purpose. In conclusion, the exploration of emotional health, integrity, commitment, and manipulation has revealed just how deeply these elements influence our lives. The search for meaning and the role of responsibility are intricately tied to our ability to engage authentically with ourselves and others. Relationships built on truth and commitment offer the potential for growth, emotional richness, and mutual respect, while those based on dishonesty or manipulation create a cycle of emotional turmoil and disconnection. The journey toward emotional health and integrity requires a willingness to face uncomfortable truths, make difficult choices, and invest in relationships with a sense of purpose and honesty. It's only when we commit to these values that we can begin to experience the fullness of life, free from the constraints of deceit and fear. Good luck on your journey of self-discovery and growth. Remember, the path to a fulfilling and meaningful life is not always easy, but it is always worth it. Thank you for taking the time to reflect on these ideas and for striving to build relationships and a life based on integrity and emotional health. Stay true to yourself and continue to grow with courage and conviction.